welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to the Parliamentary Launch of the Hillsborough Law Now campaign. As many of you know, the meeting was due to take place in Parliament, but due to the extreme heat we are experiencing, it really was necessary to be switched online for safety reasons. Disappointing, but as I said, necessary. So hopefully, though, we'll all have an opportunity to meet in person after Parliament summer recess and as our campaign develops. For me, this is a landmark moment for the country as campaigning groups and individuals come together to fight for a lasting legacy for those who have died in tragedies either at the hands of the state or in tragedies to which the state's response was deeply, deeply flawed or worse. For those who don't know me, my name is Ian Byrne and I'm a Member of Parliament for Liverpool, West Derby. I'm also a survivor of Hillsborough. And like so many of you on this call today, my adult life has been shaped by a tragedy that occurred at the hands of the state and by a cover-up of that tragedy. It's been one of the greatest honours in my life to have been asked by two of the originators of the Hillsborough Law campaign, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotheram, to become one of the custodians of the campaign's work here in Parliament. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank Andy, Steve, and my esteemed colleague, the Member of Parliament for Liverpool, Garston, Hale Wood, Maria Eagle, and also many of the other parliamentarians who've been involved in this issue since 1989 for their immense work so far on this essential issue, and to pledge my commitment in repaying the great faith they've shown in me and responsibility that's been placed on my shoulders. So I would like to thank them all for that. It really is, as I said, one of the honours of my life. I'm delighted to say we'll be hearing from the three of them during the course of the meeting today. I'm also proud and humbled that our meeting today will hear from some truly exceptional and inspirational individuals, including Margaret Aspinall from the Hillsborough Family Support Group, the Right Reverend Bishop James Jones, former Bishop of Liverpool and chair of the Hillsborough Independent Panel, Ed Daffarn from Grenfell United, Jason Evans and Mark Ward, who are seeking justice on contaminated blood, Hannah Brady from the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, Steve Pearce from Nuclear Test Veterans, Deborah Coles from Inquest, Charlotte Hennessy, who's a fantastic Hillsborough campaigner, and Pete Weatherby, QC, human rights barrister, and someone intrinsically linked with Hillsborough and other campaigns for justice. What an absolutely incredible group of people we brought together for you today, and welcome to you all. I'd just like to now take a moment to put the meeting into context. In 2017, the then Prime Minister, Theresa May, asked then Bishop of Liverpool, Reverend James Jones, to conduct a review into the lessons to be learned from Hillsborough. The recommendations of that review, called the patronising disposition of unaccountable power, a report to ensure the pain and suffering of the Hillsborough families is not repeated, were published in November 2017. However, 5 years on, they have still not been acted upon, despite being included in government manifestos, and no legislation from the government has been forthcoming. Maria Eagle, who you'll hear from next, and Lord Michael Wills have meanwhile been fighting in Parliament since 2016 to introduce the Public Advocate Bill into the Commons and into the Lords. So Bishop James, who will speak on his detailed recommendations, and I won't go into that because he'll eloquently outline them. And this is really what the meeting's about. The meeting today is convened to discuss how we, as a diverse but collaborative group of parliamentarians, mayors, campaigning groups, individuals, legal experts and activists, can best work together to ensure the recommendations of Bishop Jones' 2017 review are enacted and formalised in law in the form of a Hillsborough law. No one should have to go through what the Hillsborough families and survivors and so many others have had to live through. There is a massive imbalance in the British legal system, which sadly but unsurprisingly lies firmly in favour of those with the means to finance legal action. A Hillsborough law would therefore have massive implications for the families and survivors seeking justice on all of the campaigns represented here today, and many, many more beyond and in the future. Put simply, in order to protect everybody, we need a Hillsborough law now. And on that note, I'm absolutely delighted to formally open the meeting and introduce my fellow parliamentarian and good friend, Maria Eagle, the Member of Parliament for Liverpool, Garston and Hale Wood, to update on the progress of our Public Advocate Bill. Thank you, and over to you, Maria.
Ian, and it's good to see everybody again. And sorry you can't meet in person, but I think we'd have all been stuck on trains if we'd been trying to get down to London today. I've been introducing, along with Michael Wills in the Lords, a Public Advocate Bill since 2016. It's a bill that we drew up following on from doing some work with Hillsborough families. And it's an essential piece of legislation because it requires those caught up in public disasters, enables them, survivors and families, to have a say in whether or not they get the public advocate involved once they're appointed. The public advocate isn't a lawyer in the normal sense of the word who would represent the families in cases, in inquests, in inquiries, in court cases, civil or criminal. It's somebody who's there to look after their interests and represent them at an early stage, to give them the agency to be able to demand that there's some accountability earlier. It's based on the lessons of the Hillsborough Independent Panel, and it's based on the work that they did. But of course, they were only able to produce their findings 23 years after the events of Hillsborough. And it was a fantastic piece of work, but it was lucky that the panel got set up, and it was lucky that they did such a brilliant job because they were such brilliant people. And this doesn't always happen. And so we want to set up an advocate who's always there, who, if families caught up in disasters want it, can get them involved using the principles of freedom of information and transparency to torpedo the kind of cover-ups that we all know happen in these disasters and the kind of defensiveness from a very early stage. Imagine if the work that the Hillsborough Independent Panel did had been done a year or two into the process, instead of only being able to produce its conclusions 23 years after the event. It would have saved a lot of heartache, pain. It would have stopped the cover-ups, and it would have kept all the proceedings on the straight and narrow. And it's essential reform. I introduced into the Commons as soon as the new session started. I didn't come up in the private members bill ballot, that Michael Wills in the Lords did come up in the private members bill ballot. So he's introduced the public advocate bill into the Lords, and he's got a second reading sometime in November. I introduced it as a presentation bill, but because the bill's already written, I was able to put it in for the first private members bill Friday, which was actually last Friday. We got 20 minutes at the end of the government allowing 4 of their handout bills through, and we got 20 minutes. They would not allow it through its second reading into committee. And I'm surprised that they wouldn't allow that when the bill's written. Any concerns they would have about it, they can sort out in committee. But because they don't control it, they don't seem to want to allow it to make any progress. The minister talked it out. He didn't get a whip to shout object. He didn't get one of those backbenchers that they sometimes get to filibuster to do that. He talked it out himself. So that's pretty clearly an indication that they don't like the public advocate bill, no matter the warm words. Well, it's back on the 9th of September. Meanwhile, I'm still trying to get meetings with ministers to try and find out what their objections are, deal with the objections, still demanding that they reply to Bishop James's excellent report from now 5 years ago and respond to the consultation that Theresa May's government established into setting up a public advocate. The way in which their consultation was set up in 2017, it wouldn't be quite the same kind of thing that I'm proposing in my bill in the Commons and that Michael Wills is proposing in his bill in the Lords, but it's of a similar kind, and they clearly have had some view that it would be a useful thing to do. And we know that Theresa May herself said to Boris Johnson in the Queen's speech debate that she thought independent public advocate proposal was missing from the government.
Maria.
Sorry.
1 minute.
Okay, thanks. I don't need any more than that. I'm not going to talk my own bill out. I'll leave that to the minister. The thing is, we're back in September. We'll keep campaigning. It's an essential part of the Hillsborough law now reforms. And we're making steady progress and putting pressure on them. And that's all we can do from opposition. But we're keeping at it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria, for that update. Really welcome. Thanks for everything that you've done. Now it's a great pleasure to introduce Margaret Aspinall, former chair of the Hillsborough Family Support Group, and I'll let Margaret, she needs no introduction. So Margaret, over to you.
You're on mute, Margaret, just so you know.
Okay, can you hear me now?
No, you're muted. Just muted again, Mark. Just.
There you go.
Are you all right now? Can you all hear me? Sorry about that. Obviously, it went wrong. Yet again, they're cutting me off. They're sick of listening to me. But why I'm here to support this, I'm really, really grateful to be able to say this. But there's quite a few reasons. I could give 1,000 reasons why we should all support the Hillsborough law. But obviously, I've only got 5 minutes. And them reasons are what was mentioned earlier on, obviously, is about duty of candour. I think that is so important, and it's a disgrace that we have to say this to be put into the Hillsborough law, because I always thought it was a duty of candour by the police to always tell the truth anyway. Also, to make sure it's a level playing field for the ordinary people of this country, because as far as I'm concerned, and I'll say it straight, the law in this country is a bloody ass. It's absolutely useless. And bad laws there are there to be broken. And we have got some bad laws in this country that need to be fixed. And can I also say as well, what Marie said earlier on, absolutely right, that we should have complete, full disclosure of all documentation from the very beginning. The police had all that documentation for all of them years, and it was hidden. The police altered statements, edited statements. They got away with all of that. The families and the survivors have campaigned for all of these years to get verdicts that were so wrong overturned. We achieved that. But what did we achieve for the 97? We haven't achieved anything for them, because there's been no accountability for 97 unlawfully killed. To me, that's a mockery of the justice system in this country, and that needs changing. And why do I say a duty of candour is so important? Can I just give maybe an instance, and I'll be corrected by Peter Weatherby, because he's so up on this and so intelligent on this. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. But when we had the Taylor inquiry all them years ago, in the very beginning of 1989, the police gave evidence to Taylor. Now, they gave evidence to Taylor, and that evidence went forward to the generic inquest, right? And I hope everybody can understand where I'm coming from on this. It went forward to the generic inquest, and part of that evidence helped us to get the accidental death verdict. Now, the latest trial, where it was stopped on a technicality on the 3 police, which is Foster, Denton, Metcalfe, it was thrown out on a technicality. And I think part of that technicality was when the police gave evidence at Taylor, they went under oath. Well, does that not where, when it went to Taylor, that we got the wrong verdicts because of it all them years ago? I could be wrong on that, but that is my perception. And that's what makes me angry. And I think that's why the Hillsborough law is really, really important. I said last time when I spoke at Manchester, and Andy will remember, I'm not asking for this. We were asking for things for many years. The fans, the survivors, the campaigners. We weren't just against the establishment. The media were against us. You have to look what happened in Paris. They took the same narratives that happened at Hillsborough, what they got away with. They used exactly the bloody same, pardon my French. In fact, I'm being very polite because I can get angry over this. Because our fans were treated yet again appalling. That can never happen. These people who are listening now, who are in this meeting, they've all been fighting for the truth, for justice. That's what they all deserve. And that's why I say to you, Andy, to you, Steve, thank you for doing this, but also for you, Marie, as well, for what you want to do with the public advocate. But I thank the Bishop for what he done of the HIP. He is such a fantastic man. And anybody who gets the Bishop involved, as well as Andy, Steve, Marie, they've got the right people. And yourself, Ian, you've done a great job. I'll listen to you in Parliament. But I honestly can't believe that things now, for the good of this country, this nation, the ordinary people, that things have got to change. And if we don't stick together and demand things to change, bad laws to be changed, we're bigger than them. We voted them in, we vote them out.
Thanks,
and
Mark.
it's as simple as that.
Got a minute left, Mark. Sorry to cut you off in full flow.
That's
Brilliant,
fine.
but I've got to be brutal. Thanks very much. Thanks,
You're
Margaret. I'm gonna bring in Andy Burnham now. So over to you, Andy. I don't think you need no introduction now. I think this will be the running theme of my introductions tonight.
Oh, thanks, Ian. Evening, everybody. And thanks to the over 100 people watching this, by the way. Thanks all of you for joining us. And as you can see, there's just an amazing gathering of people here. The power of these justice campaigns as they come together is undeniable. And it's a privilege actually to be in this virtual room with you all this evening. This event, Ian, builds on an event that Steve and I held in January, the Hillsborough Law Now event, and many people here took part. Obviously, what we're trying to do tonight is hand the baton over to you and to Maria and to parliamentarians to see then if we can bring the change that Margaret rightly spoke about just now. Because actually the Bishop, when he was asked by Theresa May to conduct his report, it was to stop the pain and suffering that the Hillsborough families had gone through happening to others, but it is happening to others, and we're going to hear that tonight. If you look at the points of learning that the Bishop laid out, and if you consider the core of his recommendations, the charter, the overarching charter for bereaved families, but the parity of legal funding, the duty of candour that Margaret has spoken about, tell the truth at the first time of asking, and also the public advocate Maria has spoken about. These are the components of the Hillsborough law. And actually, if the government, having commissioned Bishop James, had then done what government should do, who is follow up on that and then implement his recommendations, I can say tonight for sure that if that had been done at the time in 2017, it would have eased the struggle of the Grenfell families. And we're going to hear from Ed tonight, but it would have made their fight kind of better. And that's one reason alone why it should have been done. But it would also have changed the response of public bodies. So the Kerslake report that I commissioned into the attack at the Manchester Arena, and it would certainly now be influencing the development of the COVID inquiry. We're going to hear from Hannah later, and we're already hearing reports there that documents are being withheld and disclosure blocked. So all of those examples tell you why this should have been done, and it's frankly outrageous, to be honest with you, that it hasn't been done, because the mistakes of the past are being repeated. I just want to say something with respect to contaminated blood, because I gave evidence to the public inquiry on Friday, and we're going to hear from Jason and Mark, who've done an outstanding job representing those many thousands of people who have suffered the injustice of infected blood. in reviewing all of the paperwork that I had access to as Secretary of State and what I've come to know since, I said to the inquiry on Friday that the Department of Health has held a line for decades that I do not believe to be true, i.e. that nothing wrong was done and that no one was knowingly given contaminated blood. As I said on Friday, I believe that to be false. And the reason why a false line has been perpetrated for so long is because of the fear of financial exposure to the government. But that is not good enough in any way, shape or form. And it was, to be honest, quite painful to me to be in that inquiry room and be facing all of those people who've suffered such injustice, harm to their health, to their family life, still there fighting in that room. It just says to me that things are so badly wrong here that we're leaving people to fight in that way for all of these years. If there had been a Hillsborough law put in place, I feel certain that the duty of candour would have benefited those who've been affected by contaminated blood. And actually Maria's public advocate would have helped as well, as they battled a very unresponsive system. Let's be honest, for 3 decades or more, that's how long their fight has been going on. And then we hear about the fight of the nuclear test veterans. We're going to hear from Steve tonight. Even longer in that case, the 70th anniversary of the first nuclear test this year. It's too hard to get the state to tell the truth at the first time of asking. And that's why what we're all calling for tonight is so fundamentally important. I could list other campaigns as well. The campaign for justice for victims of Primados, sodium valproate. There's a huge number of campaigns. And this is my final point, Ian. You know, why are all of these campaigns? Is because we have unaccountable power in this country, the unaccountable power of which the bishop spoke, and its patronizing disposition. That is the problem. The power is in the hands of those who've got most to cover up, if you like, in terms of protecting reputations or funding or whatever it might be. And it's not in the power of those seeking to establish truth and justice. And that's what the Hillsborough law is all about. I'm afraid the pain and suffering is being repeated. We're seeing echoes of Hillsborough in all of these campaigns on here tonight. That is why we need a Hillsborough law. It is why we need a Hillsborough law now. Ian, just want to say, and to Maria, massive thanks to you for picking up the baton, taking this campaign forward in Parliament. And we urge MPs on all sides of the House to get behind it, do what's right, level up the scales of justice in this country in favour of ordinary families. Thanks very much, Ian.
Thanks, thanks, Andy. Really powerful contribution, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my good friend Steve Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. And obviously thanks to Andy. And as usual, he said a lot of what I think anybody would say if they had the platform. Also, thanks to so many people, as has been said, for watching in. It's really important that we get the message out, because the fact that not a single person, as Margaret just said, has been held accountable for the Hillsborough tragedy is a stain on the country. But as we'll hear, it's not an outlier. There are many others who are seeking justice for things that have happened over many decades. And again, you're going to hear some of those things. Now, circumstances may have changed, but for me, the pattern is very similar. You know, denial, obfuscation, diversion, cover up, and I have to say, even smears. So despite the fact that the legal avenues to seek justice about the Hillsborough disaster may have been exhausted, in all honesty, the name the Hillsborough law now is probably slightly misleading to those who don't fully understand or appreciate the extent of what we're calling for tonight. Because if you like, Hillsborough is the test case for what we're proposing, and it's about opening up. It's not about opening up further criminal proceedings. It's about providing a platform now for parliamentarians, hopefully, to change the law. And if it was enacted, it would stop other families from having to go through the untold suffering and misery that too many families have had to endure in their individual campaigns. You know, our judicial system is supposed to ensure that justice is served, but too often the scales are weighted against ordinary people, and you'll hear that time and time again tonight. So we want to put that right with the Hillsborough law now. It would help to rebalance the scales of justice. And as Margaret said, it shouldn't be necessary. You would think that people in public office, for instance, would be duty bound to tell the truth as a matter of course, but that's not the case. So we do need this. Unfortunately, we shouldn't, but we do. And Bishop James has shown how we can achieve a fairer judicial system. He calls it the patronising disposition of unaccountable power. But I think Bishop James, just to paraphrase, I think at times it has become the patronising position of supposedly accountable power, that things have gone wrong with people who are charged with our safety or with doing the right thing. So I know people aren't here to listen to us. I'll hand over, Chair, so that we can hear some of the families and campaigners, because some of their stories, their first-person testimony on what they've been through, I think will really start to open people's eyes.
Thanks, Steve. And I think you've led the introduction really nicely. So next, it's a great pleasure to bring British Bishop James Jones to give his contribution. And thanks very much for everything you've done, Bishop James.
Great, Ian, thanks very much. And thank you to Steve and Andy. I just want to make one point in my 5 minutes, and that's this. It is an affront to natural justice not to adopt the Hillsborough law. It is an affront to natural justice for families to come to a contested inquest into the death of a loved one and to find that the state agency is lawyered up with public money, while the bereaved families are left legally defenseless with no financial support to defend their loved one or themselves. They are further traumatized by this experience. It is an affront, an offense to natural justice. Why can the Ministry of Justice not see this? Everybody else can. It is an affront to natural justice for the police to withhold vital information relating to a disaster and to those responsible for it. The cause and the course of justice can be served only by the police being bound by a duty of candour. At the moment, they can withhold or even destroy vital evidence. Can the Home Office not see the injustice of this? Everybody else can. It is time for Parliament to act. This is not just an historic issue. As tonight's speakers show, it's about the here and now. And this is not just a local issue, it's a national issue. Not to act on the lessons learned is, in effect, to perpetuate an injustice. Can Parliament not see this? Everybody else can.
Thanks, Bishop James. That was an extremely memorable contribution, and hopefully it will resonate where it needs to in Parliament. Next, I'd like to ask Ed from Grenfell United to speak about the campaign and what this means to Ed. Thanks, Ed.
Good evening. I'm going to spend our 5 minutes talking a little bit about who Grenfell United are, what we're fighting for, and how all of what we're fighting for links pretty directly into Hillsborough law. Grenfell United is a group of bereaved and survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire and was set up in the immediate aftermath of that tragedy to provide its members with a dignified, independent, non-party political voice. After initially responding on a purely humanitarian level and dealing with the myriad of practical issues we were encountering, Grenfell United has now focused its attention onto 3 main outcomes. Firstly, we are determined to obtain truth through the public inquiry chaired by Sir Martin Moore-Bick. Secondly, we are determined that those perpetrators responsible for the killing of 72 innocent souls face justice through the actions of the CPS and the Met Police that lead to lengthy jail times for the most egregious offenders. And finally, we are determined that we create a lasting legacy that honours the memory of those that we have lost and ensures that others who live in social housing are never mistreated and abused in the manner experienced by the Grenfell community in the years leading up to the fire. In short, we want to be remembered for the changes that come as a result of the Grenfell Tower fire and not for our ill treatment beforehand. Hillsborough law plays a fundamental role in achieving all the aforementioned aims and has particular relevance in terms of the duty of candour and parity of arms. Dealing with parity of arms first, Grenfell United were lucky enough to meet with Margaret Aspinall, Andy Burnham and Bishop James Jones in the months following the fire, and the support and advice we received from them has been of immense value over the subsequent years. The seeds of Hillsborough law were planted in our minds during these first meetings, and their relevance and importance have blossomed as our understanding of the issues faced by bereaved families has matured over the years. When we first met Margaret, she told us how the Hillsborough families were given no financial support in terms of addressing their legal costs and had to come together as a bruised and traumatized community to fundraise so that their legal rights and challenges could be represented. This feels like such a gross injustice and such an inhumane way for a society to respond to a community already shaken to its core that needs all the support it can muster and not to be further marginalised and disempowered by a lack of legal representation. In contrast, the Grenfell bereaved and survivors have been provided from day one with full legal funding at the behest of the UK government that has allowed us to be fully represented in ensuring our voices are heard at the current public inquiry and in all the other multiple areas of law that we have encountered as bereaved victims of public tragedy. Grenfell United are therefore fully supporting the Hillsborough law call for parity of arms so that no community or individuals caught up in state deaths are ever left to fend for themselves in terms of legal costs, and that bereaved families are guaranteed better access to money for legal representation at inquests that will in turn go some way in creating a more level playing field. The second area that particularly resonates for the Grenfell Tower fire bereaved and survivors is the subject of duty of candour that the Hillsborough law seeks to impose on public bodies. Surely, if the Hillsborough disaster itself is to mean anything, then those communities that following and experiencing death by public tragedy need to know that, at the very least, those giving evidence about the loss of their loved ones will be doing so with an absolute obligation to reveal all and approach their evidence with complete truthfulness and candour. There are 8 public bodies giving evidence at the Grenfell Tower public inquiry, and these public bodies' lack of candour, their unwillingness to fully engage with the inquiry process, has been a source of great pain to the bereaved and survivors. The inquiry QC, Sir Richard Millett, has described this lack of candour by corporate call participants as a merry-go-round of buck passing. We need a Hillsborough law to place a firm and binding obligation on public bodies to ensure that the patronising disposition of unaccountable power is challenged and that truth and justice will always prevail. Grenfell United also believe that the duty of candour should also stretch further than just public bodies, and that companies and organisations like our landlord, the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, and insulation manufacturers such as Kingspan and Celotex, who benefited from being awarded massive public contracts through public bodies, should also be absolutely bound by a duty of candour, just like their public paymasters. It is a great privilege for Grenfell United to stand beside Bishop James Jones, Inquest, Margaret and the HFSG, the Hillsborough families and representatives from the contaminated blood groups, COVID Families for Justice and the nuclear test veterans in calling for the implementation of Hillsborough law. We have waited too long for this vital piece of legislation to be brought before Parliament, and we are calling those in authority to ensure that we have to wait no longer. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for that and keeping on time as well. Much appreciated. Excellent contribution. Next, I'd like to ask Jason Evans from the Contaminated Blood campaign, which is, as Andy outlined before, is extremely relevant at this moment in time. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I'm Jason Evans, founder of Factor 8. We're a non-profit which advocates on behalf of victims and families impacted by the contaminated blood scandal. My father was a victim. He was infected with HIV and hepatitis C through Factor 8 blood products. He died as a result when I was 4 years old in 1993. Thousands were infected in the 70s and 80s. Thousands died over the years. But for 30 years, governments of all parties said no investigation, no inquiry. All the while, officials, civil servants went to prison over the scandal in France and Japan. There were criminal charges in Canada, but in the UK, despite best efforts, there was no official UK investigation. When I tried to get my own father's medical records in 2016, I was told they didn't exist on at least 4 occasions. A year later, when the BBC contacted the hospital in question to confirm that was the case, the record showed up within 2 days. I took a complaint about that to the Parliamentary and Health Ombudsman. As a result, they found the hospital guilty of maladministration. How did we get the UK-wide inquiry that's now going on? Well, it was only with the renewed campaign in 2016-2017 that we really broke ground. It took huge legal, media, campaigning, and of course, political pressure. People were in wheelchairs outside the Department of Health protesting again and again. I gave up my full-time salary in 2016 and still only earn part-time so that I can work on our campaign. Yet I'm fortunate because much of the campaigning was done by sick and dying people. To finally break this issue, the wall of nothing was done wrong, all the information is out there that Andy was speaking about. In the space of about 2 or 3 months, the following things happened. Andy used his final speech in Parliament to raise the issue in April 2017, threatening to go to the police if there wasn't a public inquiry. A letter before legal action was sent to the Department of Health in respect of my father around the same time in April. There was a primetime BBC Panorama programme in May 2017 and lots of press followed. There were numerous pieces of evidence that were exposed in the press in the May and June of 2017. We had a front page Daily Mail story in July 2017 exposing evidence from the National Archives. There was a group legal action against the Department of Health that was lodged in the High Court by over 300 of us in July 2017. There were at least 2 totally separate judicial reviews in the works against the Department of Health. And in July 2017, there was a letter signed by leaders of all opposition parties calling for an inquiry. People infected and affected wrote letters after letter to their MPs, to ministers, to the PM asking for an inquiry. The Sunday Times published an article about calling for an inquiry. MPs raised questions in the House of Commons, in PMQs, asking for urgent debates. The fact is, it was too hard to get an inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal. It took too long. The toll of the fight harmed people even more. But getting an inquiry was only half the battle. In July 2018, the inquiry asked the Cabinet Office to tell government departments not to destroy any evidence which might be relevant to the inquiry. In October 2018, it emerged that hadn't happened at the time because of a quote-unquote IT error. The letter dated 18th of October 2018 is on the inquiry website. The inquiry asked the NHS not to destroy evidence which might be relevant to the inquiry. You might forgive me for being suspicious that it might not happen. I sent hundreds of freedom of information requests to NHS trusts around the country asking if they'd received the notice not to destroy relevant information. I began to get hordes of replies back saying, no, we don't know what you're on about. I raised it with the inquiry raised it with the NHS, and it turned out the NHS just hadn't done what they'd been told to by a public inquiry. The news article dated 14th of February 2019 about that is on the inquiry website. And by the way, there were no repercussions for anyone whatsoever. There are many other examples. I'm conscious of time, we're almost there. If you want to learn more about the Factor 8 campaign or the contaminated blood scandal, you can visit our website at factor8scandal.uk. There's various documentaries and resources there. But my closing point is people shouldn't have to fight so hard just to know the truth about how they or their loved ones were harmed or killed. Our fight would not have been so hard with a Hillsborough law, and that's why I'll support it however I can. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Thanks a lot. Next up from the Contaminated Blood campaign is Margaret.
Hello, everybody. It's a true honour to be included with such amazing people here this afternoon. I think, frankly, this is something in a civilised society none of us should be having to do, and we should be living in a different world. When these tragedies are told, the impact on us as people and the human element always seem to be left behind. The media want to focus on the horrors. They like the sensational headlines, but they never focus on us and what it's brought for us to get to this position. So, as Jason said there, with some of the work he's been doing, I just wanted to give you the human element of the contaminated blood scandal side, if I can. So haemophilia is a genetic bleeding disorder. You're born with it, hereditary, and over the decades, medical science has shown many advances. But in years gone by, it was believed that boys got it, women carried it, and that's how the genetic line came along. Haemophilia is the most famous of those because we can revert back to Queen Victoria and the story of the mad monk Rasputin and the prince that he looked after. The prince suffered from haemophilia and it was known as the royal disease. But if I take you back to Victorian London, that identifiable group of children was seen as sickly, costly, and they just died young. They just were written off. And that kind of morality was also seen across Parliament and the high society and the wider community, that if you were poor, sick, or you'd fallen on hard times, then you became worthless, as did life. Bring that forward to the 1970s. History showed where infections from blood they knew about, and then how could they make money from this red gold? So in the United States, they took a pint of blood and they took components from it to make blood products. We're talking to make these blood products, sometimes up to 50,000 bags of blood went into huge vats, were all mixed together, but they were sourced from, the term used was called skid row donors. So we're talking people who were paid for their blood, drug addicts, alcoholics, prostitutes. In San Francisco, they actually had the blood transfusion wagons stationed outside bathhouses. And as the gay guys came out of the bathhouses, the saunas, they asked them if they wanted to help with hepatitis research and make a few dollars. And so they gave their blood. That blood entered into those 50,000 vats, big vats, mixed up, and then it was exported all over the world and injected directly into the veins of people like me, little boys. I was diagnosed at the age of 3 years old in 1972, and immediately I turned bright yellow, and that was from hepatitis. They knew about the dangers, but they carried on, and even when little boys died, nobody asked any questions because those haemophiliacs were just, oh, well, they won't amount to anything. We've even got ministers stating that the life of a haemophiliac is an expensive one to maintain. They're ill-educated cripples and they'll never amount to anything. Then, of course, we had the devastating impact of AIDS. And we saw how the world melted down with AIDS, the outrage, the hate that came with AIDS. We have a community where little boys like myself were expelled from school and homes were attacked, their cars were set on fire, AIDS scum daubed across the front of their houses. The horrors go on and on. In America, little boys were even shot. So that's just for having this genetic disorder. As we move forward, hepatitis C then became another crisis. The timeline is skewed because of AIDS being as deadly as it was. But still, nobody was asking why. Why was this happening? Why were these people dying? How was this allowed to happen? so that we just carried on dying. Then we go into the 2000s, and another letter dropped on the map to say that we've been exposed to VCJD. So the figure of pathogens that we have been infected with and exposed to is into the double figures, and still nobody has asked why. But when you do ask why, like everyone here has said and will say, that you come up against the system, you come up against the establishment. And I was met with attack, assault. And in fact, I went to my hospital one day for a review, and a security guard met me because the hospital had told them I had a gun and I was going to shoot them. So I was kicked out of the hospital.
Sorry, Mark, 1 minute left.
1 minute left.
Really sorry to cut across you.
Okay, we've been fighting for 40 years and coming up, as everybody has seen, with these barriers. And thankfully now we do have this public inquiry, which thousands of people have given their lives for. And if I could just put this into context, finally, 4,600 haemophiliacs were infected with hepatitis C. That's nearly every haemophiliac in the United Kingdom. 1,243 were also infected with HIV. Since this inquiry was established or announced in 2017, 419 people have died. One dies every 96 hours. So the thing that separates us from your tragedies is you had one event which brought you together in your grief. We've been spread out over 5 decades with people dying in the background anonymously. And that's really where they've used us to divide our community, because they've left us alone. But now our voices are together, and I will give you the same promise I gave my friends who are no longer here. While I have breath, I will fight for you. I will fight for justice. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, for them very, very powerful words. Next, I'm going to bring in Hannah Brady from the COVID Justice 19 Bereaved Families for Justice.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you. I'm sure many of the families represented here today from different campaigns for justice are going to agree that often it feels like we have to fight to be heard. So I'm really grateful to Hillsborough Law Now for their invitation to represent the 6,000 families of our campaign. They're the relatives of just over 200,000 people that died needlessly with COVID-19 over these past 2 awful years. I'm 26 years old, and I remember being taught about the Hillsborough disaster at school, or mentions of the contaminated blood, like it was history, or like it still didn't impact people today. No mention of inquiries, lesson learned, or the relatives and loved ones of those lost. And it was like the tragedies had happened with no human intervention or culpability, you know, they just were. I also remember being at university when my home city was attacked by the Manchester Arena bomber, and when the Grenfell Tower fire claimed so many lives. I was older now, but I was shocked by the tragedy and more aware that things had gone seriously wrong to permit these evil acts, and that people needed to be held to account. Again, the response from those in power was just that accountability was so far from their minds, and it should be so far from everyone else's too. The message pretty much was just move on. I'm so proud to be here amongst you today. Not much makes me cry after what I've been through, but being here in this meeting has, because you're a collection of such inspirational people that I never thought I'd have to be a part of, but we never think that these things are going to happen to us or to our loved ones. When COVID-19 was a distant threat that politicians were just bumbling about, it didn't even occur to me that my dad was someone I had to worry about. He was 55, he was a fit and healthy key worker from Wigan, and he caught COVID on his way to work, and he suffered in intensive care for 45 days, never to wake up to say goodbye to me or my sister, whose last act of kindness was just to switch his ventilator off and give him some peace. It's been over 2 years since we lost him, and I still pick up the phone to tell him my good news or worry that I've not bought him the right Christmas present. The grief that I've got will never go away, and it's compounded by the injustice of his death, of the 200,000 people who died with him, and that's a feeling that I know you can all relate to. Unfortunately for us all, the injustice is prolonged by a system that is not currently fit for purpose, because it is a system that allows public officials to lie without repercussions, a system where evidence can be tampered with or destroyed because prime ministers know inquiries will shatter their grip on power, a system where bereaved families are dragged through the media and belittled with no public advocate to defend them, a system where loved ones and their families are second to ego, power struggles and politics. A system where families of those who already lost loved ones care more about the lives at risk from stadiums or Gladden or terrorism or second and third waves of COVID than the people responsible for preventing it all. The COVID inquiries, national and devolved, will be unique in many ways. Its scope, its scale, its length, but also the guilt and gratitude that core participants like bereaved families like me feel towards the families touched by Hillsborough, Grenfell, Manchester Arena, contaminated blood and nuclear testing. Without the shambolic, disorganised and at times cruel treatment that you faced in your fight for inquiries, for justice and the truth, the COVID inquiry would not be what we hope it will be today. Your fight against this broken system and how it treats families like mine and how it treats the truth is what made the COVID inquiry something that I've got some faith in. An inquiry that plans to have bereaved families at its centre, an inquiry with a chair that's pledged to take evidence tampering and question evasion as seriously as possible. But still, this is not enshrined in law. My hope is that when the next tragedy strikes and the need for a public inquiry arises, the Hillsborough law will have been passed, that families impacted by the next tragedy do not have to pay for judicial reviews to find out loved ones were killed unlawfully like our care home families, that they don't have to endure anything like Partygate or an outgoing Prime Minister still to this day seeking to bar disclosure of documents that will paint his cabinet in a poor light, or one who only yesterday stood in the House of Commons celebrating his excellent handling of the pandemic, that families do not have to rely on people's COVID inquiries to find misconduct in public office, that families do not have to deal with a government who lie first, apologise second, and then lie again with impunity. My hope is also that I do not have to still be fighting to push forward this change in law 40 years from now, like some of you, but I know that I have that fight in me because it's fueled by the love that I had for my dad, because he was taken away from me and my sister far too young, and that love has nowhere to go but in a pursuit of justice. Our campaign, COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice UK, also has that fight in us to fight for Hillsborough law now. But we need those in power to take up the fight too. And the time is now, so that when the next tragedy strikes, those impacted by it will not have to suffer what we all had to and continue to suffer. Thank you.
Brilliant, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. And I'm sure your dad will be very, very proud of what you're doing. Well done. Next, I'm going to bring in Nicola and Kai from the Truth About Zane campaign.
Thank you. In this Bereaved Parents Month, many injustices, one struggle. This is Zane Gbangbola, my beautiful 7-year-old boy who was killed in 2014, 101 months ago. What happened to Zane is an ongoing and burning injustice. We campaign for truth and tell what really happened, and the ongoing deceits used to cover up the failings of public organisations and some of the despicable human beings within them. It is, in our limited time, I just want to recap on what I said at Hillsborough Law Now in January. Back in 2014, our house was infused with a chemical weapon, hydrogen cyanide. Some know it as invisible odorless Zyklon B, used to kill millions in World War II gas chambers, detected multiple times in our home by expert hazmat. I explained that our call was for an independent panel inquiry following a disgraceful and abusive inquest. I stated that the reported fact, as exposed by the BBC, is that political pressure existed from day one, allied to a campaign of misdirection and lies used to divert attention away from the failures of the state. Zane was denied legal aid 3 times, whilst a phalanx of all public authorities were given legal aid. Even the coroner had legal aid, enabling all of them to appoint the best QCs in the land. Zane was denied a jury. Zane was denied a proper investigation. We wheelchaired the streets to raise £80,000 to pay for representation. at our own son's sham inquest. Question, what do you do when you and others present at the scene tell the truth about how your child was killed and those who were there and should investigate simply refuse to? And what do you do if public authorities are implicated? Elected members at a Conservative council in the area that Zane lived unanimously called Zane's case a cover-up and demanded an independent panel inquiry and an investigation into their government for this embarrassing state of affairs where there was FOIs, whistleblowers, etc., providing hydrogen cyanide facts and evidence galore, but still no investigation. The answer to my question is look around you at the people, look around you at the faces here, forced to plead for truth. The more vulnerable we are, the longer it can take, the easier we are to abuse. If they can do this to the 97 people of Hillsborough, the 72 people of Grenfell, the 2,000 people of infected blood, think what they can do to the ones forced to walk alone, like us. Except, actually, we weren't alone. Poisoned on that February 2014 night in Surrey, FOIs show that there were many that were unwell, to the extent that hospitals were overwhelmed. Nicole's lone efforts to resuscitate Zane, her son, and call for emergency services resulted in the area being evacuated and many lives being saved, though they did need care and decontamination. I was unconscious and with hydrogen cyanide in my blood, virtually dead in cardiac arrest. I was totally unable to help Nicole or my son. To the world, people can be seen as numbers, but to parents, these are children that mean the whole world. Covering up killings, covering up parties makes clear institutions can be untrustworthy and commit crimes. They use spin, deception and lies to avoid accountability, probity and candor, believing that there is one law for them and another for others. Being a one should not mean that you have to walk alone. Just look at George Floyd. The true measure is who amongst the powerful stand up for the truth, to which all of us here owe a debt of gratitude to Andy Burnham, Steve Rotheram, unions, Sir Keir Starmer, Natalie Bennett, Steve Kelly, and the many more that are here represented today. The patronising disposition of unaccountable power that has affected us all needs to be addressed. I urge politicians here to get behind Hillsborough law now and show a will to get it passed without delay. Reforms are also needed to public inquiries. Critical justice campaign theory suggests the system is broken and can be rigged, enabled by a lack of proper due diligence. These injustices must be corrected and those responsible for crimes held to account for present and for future generations to come. Remember, in Zane's case, there were even reports predicting death from migrating landfill gases 4 years before Zane was killed. With this forewarning, those authorities used these reports to protect their own properties next door to Zane's home with gas-proof membranes. You see, they knew. And the death
sorry, just 1 minute, please.
Thanks, was totally avoidable. Truth is, all people killed have to get justice. Robbing these people of truth affects everyone, and it's our collective duty to act. We will deliver Zane's petition of 100,000 signatures on the 21st of October, and all of you here are welcome to join us. No one should be tired of hearing the voices of those that call out for justice. They should be tired of hearing nothing has been done. Rest in peace, Zane. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. Next, I'm going to bring Steve Pearson from the Nuclear Test Veterans. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Ian. I'm here to tell you about a different scandal. Successive UK governments have been sweeping people like me under the carpet for 70 years. My name is Steve Pearce. My late father, David Pearce, was an RAF officer in charge of the airfield at Maralinga in South Australia, where Britain detonated 7 nuclear weapons and carried out 593 plutonium experiments between 1953 and 1963. My dad was there during those highly toxic plutonium experiments, where plutonium was blown up in the open air using conventional explosives. I was born 10 years later with shortened limbs, hydrocephalus, a curved spine, and one leg bent 45 degrees the wrong way. The doctors are unable to diagnose my condition. I am one of 155,000 descendants of our atomic veterans. Us descendants report 10 times the normal number of birth defects, missing and extra teeth, giant limbs, deformed organs, childhood cancers, misshaped bones, miscarriages, and infertility. As the number of descendants grows, the genetic damage travels through to the next generation. The effects of radiation will damage the genes of future generations for the next 500 years, causing disability, suffering, and death. Successive governments have refused to study our health and concentrated the massive resources of state in a strategy of delay, deny until we die. Millions of taxpayer pounds have been spent fighting war pensions and court claims. Our dad's medical records have had pages ripped out and false information has been given, and that is a crime. We have proof our dads were ordered to sail, fly, and crawl through radioactive fallout. Yet the MOD has said for 7 decades that no one was in danger, that internal contamination was not possible. My dad told me how the safety measures at Maralinga were basically a single strand wire fence separating the test areas from the rest. Yet it was the outback. The wind blew the contaminated sand onto every surface, every cup, every meal they ate. Nowhere was safe. We have MOD documents saying the men would have their blood tested. We have witnesses who say their blood was taken. Today, the MOD refuses to show us those records. In 2018, they said they'd look at a medal for us. And in 2020, said there was not enough risk involved even for that. Yes, they deemed witnessing successive nuclear explosions was not risky. Would those same officials who made that decision choose to stay in Westminster while a nuclear weapon was detonated south of the river? The state took our health and is withholding the one thing we want, the truth. My conditions cannot be cured, but I can live with them. There are many veterans, children and grandchildren who could not. Disease, deformity, and in some cases suicide have taken them from us. Of the 22,000 who served at Britain's 45 nuclear bomb tests and the minor trials, fewer than 3,000 now remain. Many have died from cancers and other conditions that can be directly linked to radiation. For most of my life, I did not want to father children in case I passed on whatever is wrong in my DNA. However, a few years ago, I fell in love, got married, and in May last year, I became a father to Sasha, our wonderful little boy. I have guilt about bringing him into the world. I feel I played genetic Russian roulette with his life. He's perfectly healthy so far, but will he develop cancers in 5, 10, 20 years' time? As he grows up, I'll have the constant fear that I may watch him die. And my story echoes that of many other descendants. My son deserves the truth. I deserve the truth. All nuclear test veterans and their families deserve to know the truth. I want him to grow up in a world where officials of state do not use all the resources at their disposal to delay, deny, and wait for the truth to die. We need a Hillsborough law now. This country, every citizen needs the Hillsborough law now. I'd just like to thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Really powerful as ever. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Next, I'm going to bring Deborah Coles in from Inquest, just to outline the importance of Hillsborough law now. Over to you, Deb.
Thank you, and some phenomenal contributions already. Inquest works with bereaved people after state-related deaths, and we see daily examples of the interests of powerful individuals, institutions prevailing over the access of bereaved people to the truth and transparency about how and why their relative died. And this cuts across social class, race, and gender. The search for answers and the truth after a death invariably begins to feel like a battle as the shutters come down from public authorities. This starts from the immediate aftermath of a death, with the failure to provide families with independent advice and support on their legal rights and what are the post-death processes. And at a time of traumatic grief, bereaved people have to learn the language of death. What is a post-mortem? What is a coroner, an inquest, an inquiry? In public authorities and private corporations which bear responsibility for the health and safety of the public, as we've heard tonight, there is an endemic culture of delay, denial, and institutional defensiveness. And this is the default position. Public authorities and public servants too often frustrate the search for the truth, frequently delay or drip feed disclosure of documents, often up to the point of the inquiry or the inquest. Documents are lost or altered. At inquests, the state will routinely be legally represented from the public purse, whilst families have to go through intrusive funding applications or indeed fundraise for their own lawyer. Families enter an unknown process, seeking to simply understand what happened and to get to the truth. But the clear agenda of state and corporate lawyers is to approach the inquest and inquiry process as a damage limitation exercise, attempting to close down questioning, narrowing the remit, minimizing their responsibility, and seeking to prevent criticism as far as possible. Multiple lawyers for state bodies and corporations will close ranks and support each other. And rather than organisations seeing public scrutiny as an opportunity to learn from past mistakes, reform dangerous practices and safeguard lives in the future, it is more concerned with reputation management, defending policies and practices, even where there is clear-cut evidence of systemic or individual failings. And of course, we know that historically the state has taken a defensive position to protect its own interests. From the Peterloo massacre, Bloody Sunday, Hillsborough, Orgreave, Grenfell, the Daniel Morgan review, and the hundreds of men, women, and children who die in our state institutions every year. The interests of public bodies are different from those of bereaved families grieving a loved one. Families who start off believing in the system lose faith and trust in it. Finally, with the components of Hillsborough law, we have a legislative lever that goes some way to compel state officials to tell the truth. I've spoken to many people who are shocked to discover that this isn't already the case. Suffice to say, it's never those families with whom we work who experience firsthand this lack of candour and its impact. What often goes unmentioned is the high price paid by bereaved families in remaining involved in the lengthy, complex investigation, inquest, or inquiry process. And as we've heard tonight, the emotional and physical impact on generations of families should not be forgotten, nor how it's exacerbated by state denial, secrecy, insensitivity, delays, funding problems, and lack of accountability. We also see too often victim blaming, state narratives designed to deflect attention from individuals or organisational failure and wrongdoing, patterns going back decades. In Hillsborough, the police blamed fans. In Grenfell, public bodies have been more concerned about public disorder after the fire than the well-being of survivors. Something we see in the deaths of people who die in mental health settings is a narrative that they would have died anyway. If enacted, Hillsborough law will help ensure there is no hiding place for official wrongdoing or failure. It will help prevent cover-ups and enable swifter and fairer justice. Crucially, it will provide for parity of representation for victims of disasters and other controversial state death cases. It is, after all, families' lawyers who push for the necessary scrutiny and try and uncover the truth and ensure that families' voices are heard. Impunity and a lack of accountability encourages wrongdoing and dishonesty and severely damages the reputation of public authorities and public trust. A long list of bereaved family groups has supported the demand for a statutory duty of candour in Hillsborough law, as too have many senior judges and inquirers. The inspiration for the new law came from the Hillsborough families. At the crux of this is the democratic accountability.
1 minute, Deb.
Is the democratic accountability of public authorities at an individual and corporate level. Truth, justice, and accountability in a so-called democratic society should not have to be fought for. It would be a fitting legacy if Hillsborough law brought about improvements to benefit the many families still facing the same hurdles that the Hillsborough families battled against. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Thanks for everything you do with Inquest. Next, it's a real honour to introduce Charlotte Hennessy. Charlotte, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. So for those who may not know, my name is Charlotte Hennessy and I'm the daughter of Jimmy Hennessy, who was killed at Hillsborough when I was 6. I was too young to campaign at the time, being just such a young child. So I've had to rely on the campaign of the Hillsborough Family Support Group, the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, survivors and, you know, people in general who were there to tell the truth and fight for what was right. But inevitably, it took 23 years for me to find out personally what happened to my dad, and that was via the Hillsborough Independent Panel report. So from that, I was able to find out my dad's movements and the full extent of what happened to him and how he ended up dying. But it wasn't because of UK legislation, you know, that wasn't there to protect me, if you like. So moving forward to the inquest, I think that was it was so overwhelming, and it was just such a huge breakthrough in obtaining truth and justice. Really, you know, fans were finally exonerated, and the 96 had death certificates that were true and they were real and true to them and what happened to them, which was then closely followed by Tony Bland when he sadly passed away. But one of the main chapters of closure during the inquest, in my opinion, was when Duckenfield made his admissions. He told the jury and the world that he lied about the opening of Gate C. So from giving the order of opening Gate C to the time that he then lied to Graham Kelly that the fans had stormed it, it took just 14 minutes. 14 minutes for that lie to just fall out of his mouth. And then it took 25 years for him to finally admit that he had actually told that lie. So then if we fast forward to 2019, at his criminal trial, a judge then ruled that the jury didn't need to hear that he'd made those admissions. And Duckenfield wasn't made to give evidence either. Statements were allowed to be read, and he was protected, sat next to his legal team. So again, he got away with the gross negligence, manslaughter of my dad, the other 96 that died, and the injuries and trauma of all the others who survived. In 2021, we then saw the trial of former South Yorkshire Solicitor Peter Metcalfe, Chief Superintendent Donald Denton, and Detective Chief Inspector Alan Foster, and which was quite literally thrown out of court. Margaret touched on it earlier. And those 3 men were accused of changing 68 police statements. This wasn't even about changing the statements of Liverpool fans. This was changing the statements of their own, of their colleagues. And they were trying to sanitize criticism and wrongdoings of their own police force. But Mr. Justice William Davis ruled that there was no legal case to answer because they'd only altered statements that were prepared for a public inquiry. He deemed it as an administrative exercise and not a course of public justice. Not only is it absolutely ludicrous that these public servants can pick and choose which bits of evidence to tell, but it's also absolutely disgusting that people's lives can be lost, hundreds can be injured and still live now 33 years with the mental trauma of what they went through on that day. And those that are meant to protect and serve can manipulate the truth, tell the bits that they choose to, and protect their own. I say it all the time, and I know that family members, survivors and campaigners that have, have campaigned, that they're too humble to accept it and say it themselves. But I will always be forever grateful for those who campaigned when I was too small to, because otherwise I would never know what happened to my dad. And Jimmy Hennessy, along with everyone else, would have been buried in a lie. You know, what sort of a country do we live in where bereaved mothers, bereaved fathers and other extended family members are having to form together groups and campaign for money and accept donations to get the truth of what happened, and a fair trial and an inquest of what happened to their loved ones? It took 2 decades for those to campaign, and then they just got away with it anyway. And I firmly believe,
1 minute left.
Okay, I firmly believe that a Hillsborough law will change all of this. It will protect families like ours and like those that you've heard from today. And it will give people in authority, those who are supposed to protect and serve us, a duty of candour and a legislation that will force them to tell the truth. Thank you for asking me to speak along so many inspirational people.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks for that. Thanks for everything that you've done as well. Next, it's Pete Weatherby, human rights barrister, and somebody who's super familiar to many on this call, and many will be watching. Who'll be watching this live. So over to you, Pete, and thanks for everything you've done, and certainly continuing that work in Paris as well.
Thanks very much, Ian. In April 2016, the truth about Hillsborough was finally and definitively resolved by a jury in a formal court process: unlawful killing. The jury were only there because of Margaret and Charlotte and all the other families refusing to give up. And of course, because of the amazing support from Andy and Steve and Maria and Ian and Deb Cole's Inquest, and of course the remarkable Bishop James, amongst many others, an inspiration to us all. But the reason it took more than 27 years and involved the righting of a terrible wrong, probably the worst miscarriage of justice in our history, was because public servants chose either to lie or to do everything possible to hide the truth. If Hillsborough was an isolated example, it would be a shocking historical moment, but it isn't, as we know from all of the testimonies that we've heard today. I represented many of the Hillsborough families, some of the Grenfell families, the Manchester Arena families. Currently, I represent the COVID bereaved, happily for me, including Hannah that spoke earlier. And tomorrow I'm off to Lisbon to take part in the inquiry into the near disaster in Paris at the Champions League final, which was so nearly a repeat of Hillsborough. And all of those cases inform me, and they provide evidence beyond doubt that the culture of denial, institutional defensiveness, is ingrained in our system. And it's that problem that has to be addressed. And the problem that allowed the truth to be hidden for so long was the lack of provisions in our law to require public servants and corporations responsible for public safety to tell the truth. Shocking, isn't it, that such laws are not there, but shocking also that they should be required at all. but required they most certainly are. If Hillsborough law had been in existence at the time of Hillsborough, what would it have meant? What difference would it have made? Well, Hillsborough law contains 3 pillars. It's the Public Authorities Accountability Bill that Andy introduced into Parliament in March 2017. And firstly, Hillsborough law starts by codifying, that's just a lawyer's way of saying set out in written law, the duty, the legal obligation to tell the truth that lawyers call the duty of candour. That first pillar of Hillsborough law is only a stepping stone to the second requirement, which is the toolbox which it provides to enforce the duty to tell the truth and to make it meaningful. So the second duty imposes a positive duty on public servants and corporations, not only to tell the truth, but to proactively assist official investigations by the police and regulatory authorities and public inquiries and inquests and other official inquiries set up by local and central government. And it requires senior officers to sign off those duties and take responsibility for them. And the reason that Hillsborough law will be so effective is that this proactive duty requires transparency, requires disclosure, and requires identification of facts which sometimes may show their own failures. And it's also crucially backed up by criminal sanctions where there is willful non-compliance. Let me repeat that, willful non-compliance. The intention is not to criminalise, but to provide an effective and not merely aspirational set of provisions. The intention is to change the culture and make chief officers and chief executives look to learn from disasters and major incidents rather than hide the truth to protect their own reputations and that of their own organisation, a critical part of the problem. And of course, the third pillar is provisions to ensure that those most affected, those that we've heard from today, are provided with representation to safeguard their interests and not be outgunned, as is so often the case and has been the case in the past, by the columns of lawyers deployed by public authorities and corporations, often at huge public expense. If Hillsborough law had been in place in 1989, it would have been impossible for the truth to have been hidden, because those who chose to lie or hide the truth would have known that they would be quickly found out and potentially prosecuted. And another important point is swifter and more targeted investigations and inquiries produces swifter justice. It reduces stress for the families and also the witnesses. Hillsborough law requiring public servants to come up with the facts at the outset makes for swifter justice, and swifter processes. Swifter justice is also much cheaper, and Hillsborough law would undeniably save huge amounts of public money. Swifter outcomes ensure learning can be put into practice and can ensure that future lives can be saved. And Hillsborough itself provides a clear example of all of this. One of the major problems for the families, even during the inquests in 2016, was that various former senior police officers were able to run the lies of the past and try to persuade the jury that hooligans were responsible for the catastrophe that unfolded, that the disaster was the fault of the supporters and the victims themselves most terribly. Had Hillsborough law been in place, their police force, South Yorkshire Police, would have been compelled to state their position at the outset, a position their chief constable had finally stated to the BBC in 2012, that the supporters were not to blame, that the disaster was caused by senior police commanders themselves, and that lies had been told to cover up the truth. And if South Yorkshire Police had been compelled to state that to the jury at the outset of the process, how on earth could former senior officers have argued to the contrary? Months of evidence would not have had to be heard and families distressed. A false narrative could have been squashed at the outset of the process. Hillsborough law is a legacy of the families. It is their process, their agency. It's a project to prevent anything like their experience from happening again. It's been crafted to be intensely practical and to meet the problems head on. It's been subjected to a full academic conference and the scrutiny of parliamentary draft persons. It's a sophisticated bill with a laser-guided purpose. And moreover, in the context of this as a parliamentary meeting, the families have insisted and continue to insist that it's put forward on a cross-party basis. This should not be, and it is not a partisan problem or issue, and neither is the solution. We've heard today the depressingly similar plight of many bereaved families and those affected from major events. And we've heard of the ongoing need for an enforceable duty of candour. It's not just a pleas from the families themselves, but as Deb Coles pointed out, it's a plea that's coming increasingly from chairs of inquiries. In 2020, the organisation Justice, that campaigns for legal reform, set up a panel of lawyers involved from all sides. And it was led by 3 senior judges. So Robert Owen, who was the chair of the Litvinenko inquiry, Sir John Goldring, who was the judge in the Hillsborough cases, and Sir Peter Thornton, the former chief coroner, to look at what should change in inquiries and inquests. And the issue of Hillsborough law was fully ventilated and argued over by people who'd represented public authorities as well as people who'd represented families. And those 3 judges and the panel came out in its report to say that Hillsborough law, the statutory duty of candour, was something that was required. So it's people on all sides of the equation, thank you very much, who are calling for this. And the time is now. So it's very welcome indeed that this all-party group is being reformed and relaunched under Ian's and Maria's guidance, hopefully. But we hope that a cross-party group of MPs will drive it forward to get the government to put Andy's bill, the Public Authorities Accountability Bill, back before Parliament and drive it through. It had its first hearing before it was stopped by the 2017 general election. And we hope also that MPs who get involved will persuade their own parties to include Hillsborough law in their manifestos for the next election. And outside of Parliament, the campaign is being re-galvanised to coordinate support for pushing it through Parliament. Thanks very much, Ian.
Thanks, Pete. And tonight we've heard incredibly powerful testimony this evening, and thank you so much to everybody for their brave and powerful testimony tonight. I think the case for Hillsborough law has never been stronger, and tonight we've seen how important joining in the collective is to achieve the aims of what we all want to achieve. And I think, as Anna summed it up really powerfully, we want to make sure when the next tragedy strikes, that families do not have to go through this horrific treatment. So, parliamentary wise, we will formulate a Hillsborough law at APPG, which is no parliamentary group, which will assist putting the pressure on and shining a light on what's happening in September. As Pete outlined, we need to build pressure on all parties to ensure that the Hillsborough law is included in a manifesto, because an election may be imminent where we are politically. And I'd just like to thank everybody who's spoken tonight. We have a job of work to do, and I really look forward to working with you all to achieve what we all want, which is a Hillsborough law. And I'd like to bring in Maria Eagle just to say a few words to finish. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks to everybody who's come along and spoken so powerfully about their own experience and what a difference Hillsborough law would make to them, what a difference the Public Advocate bill would make to them. We have to keep pushing in Parliament. The current government owe us a response to Bishop James's 2017 report. I cannot believe that they are not going to respond to it at some point. We were promised that they would respond by last Christmas. In the debate that we held, the backbench business debate that we held in the Commons following the collapse of the Hillsborough criminal trials, That hasn't happened. The minister who promised it was moved and then resigned. There's obviously a lot of churning about in respect of the government at the moment, which may delay things, but we must keep pushing, whoever the ministers are, whenever we can, to produce a response to Bishop James's report. It's unconscionable that it's taken them 5 years. And of course, in the middle of that report, his recommendations will set a platform for us delivering this legislation. There's no reason why we can't do it. And I agree very much that it's got to be possible for us to get commitments. There will be a general election in the next couple of years. We've got to get this into manifestos, and we've got to get it up the agenda. And I think with the help of all of you outside of Parliament, the commitment of those of us inside Parliament to getting these things done, I believe we have every chance of getting this through. And whenever it happens, we will make sure that it does. And we certainly won't stop until it has. And I think that the meeting tonight has just reinforced that feeling that we all have, that this must now be done, and it will be.
Thanks, Brady, and good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone. I've never heard such a brilliant series of speeches as those. It's been a privilege to be with you all. Thanks, everyone.